Clive Barker Podcast Audio Commentaries.
Thanks to your generous donations to our Kickstarter funding campaign,
Clive Barker Podcast presents Fundraiser 6, Bill Seeker. Welcome. This is episode 238, and you might be reading the title wondering why we're talking about Psycho. So in our Kickstarter, we had agreed to do audio commentaries for the Clive Barker's A to Z of horror, the movies that he covered so we've got A is for American Psycho, which talked about the Psycho movies and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. So that's kind of where we're at, and I'm Ryan.
I'm Joe.
And I'm Marcus.
Yeah, and it's good to have you back again, Marcus.
It's good to be back. Thank you for having me back.
And now the American Psycho chapter could also include the actual movie American Psycho.
I know. Just to make it more confusing, yes. A is for American Psycho, but not the movie American Psycho.
Yeah, so that we did a series of episodes about the A through Z of horror some time ago.
Yeah.
And I think those started out around episode 138, I think.
Last year I think we did.
Yeah, we did 140, 141, 142, all the way down to maybe 146. So it was 8 parts that we were talking about the A through Z of horror. We were going through some of the letters, and then, of course, that book was done by Clive Barker and Stephen Jones, who also worked with Clive Barker making some of the nonfiction anthology like Shadows in Eden. Yeah. And he was also Clive Barker's publicist for Hellraiser 1 and 2, and I think Nightbreed as well. It's a cool book where Clive brings some of the recommendations about some of the movies that he grew up with and movies that he likes as defining of the horror genre. And Ryan, we were talking just about this before we started, which was that I think Psycho might have been one of the first movies that Clive saw when he was a kid, right?
Yeah, he was in the theater and he came, I think, didn't he come in late? So he saw the ending of the movie and he saw the way that it made the audience react. And so he stayed and watched the movie a second time, and he was all excited about, he knew what the ending was going to be, and he got to watch the audience's reaction to that. And that kind of made him kind of fall in love with the horror genre and decide that he wanted to be part of that.
Right on, yeah. He gave an interview to the New York Times in 2002 where he said he was 14. He sneaked with a friend into a Liverpool theater, and they arrived exactly at the wrong time, right at the end of Psycho. Mm-hmm. So when Marion Crane's sister goes into the fruit cellar and sees the mummified, Mrs. Bates' body, and then in comes Anthony Perkins in drag holding a knife, and he's like, he's sliding down the seat thinking, how do people survive these things? And then he stuck around for the second showing of the movie, and that's when like you said, he became obsessed. He saw some girls in the front row and he was like checking out their reactions, and then he said, I so much want to do this to people. So that's that's one of the things that got him into horror.
Yeah Really cool. And so it does have a little tangential relation to Clive Barker, and also...
And Marcus, you studied actually a semester on Hitchcock, right? You were talking to us about that?
Yeah, I took an Alfred Hitchcock class at Sacramento State University a few semesters ago. And so that's why when I saw you guys were doing Psycho, I was like, oh, okay, I think I can add a few things to that conversation.
That would be awesome.
I haven't seen it in a while, so please forgive me in that regard. But
yeah, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the book was written by Robert Bloch.
Yes.
And it's here's another quote by Clive Barker about the book. He says, it's a much more violent book than it is a movie. The girl gets beheaded in the shower as opposed to simply stabbed to death. But the book is mild by comparison with the facts of Ed Gein. So basically, Robert Bloch was inspired by Ed Gein, the guy in Wisconsin who turns out he was living at home with the mummified corpse of his mother as well, kind of like, the character of Norman Bates. But he also he also killed 2 women. He murdered 2 women, and he had a house somewhere in the middle of farmland where he just had a bunch of things that he also took from graveyards, like upholstered a couple of chairs with human skin, and those kind of things that also ended up inspiring Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right?
Yes,
Leatherface. Yeah. So, and another movie that I think was called Deranged or something, a British movie, maybe.
That was also covered in the book, but I couldn't find any way to easily watch that. So,
yeah, I've never even heard of that.
Yeah. Maybe someday, but I don't know. I don't know if we'll be able to watch that right now.
Yeah.
But we've got Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock 1960 original movie, queued up to right before the logo, the
Universal logo. So, Marcus, would you like to do the honors and have our audience do the countdown before they hit play so we can all sync up our commentary?
Sure. All right. Is everyone ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1, play.
Okay.
All
I think mine might be still a little loud.
All righty.
Okay.
So actually, I think that from what I read, Hitchcock did this movie using some of his usual crew that worked with him on TV. So, and this movie was about less than $900,000 budget.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot in 1960, though, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah.
And I think this theme repeats throughout the movie. This sort of opening theme that feels really sort of frantic and it feels like a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, and that's very indicative of so many of Hitchcock's openings. And one thing I love about the score is that it was pretty much stolen and reused in Reanimator. I don't know if you guys have seen that or not.
Exactly.
Oh my God! No, I haven't seen that movie.
Yep.
And even Reanimator does a very Hitchcockian opening too, with the opening credits.
Yeah, with a traveling shot that goes in over a desk or something, or a bunch of things.
There's all these colorful images of like anatomical drawings.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I was thinking about something else, yeah. And here's this beautiful Saul Bass intro sequence. So Saul Bass worked also on some Bond film intros, and he kind of launched this stylized trend of movie intros, right? I'll put some show notes here. One article from IndieWire has some of the top 10 Saul Bass greatest title sequences.
And it kind of sucks because we don't get title sequences like this anymore. You know, Star Wars, as much as I love Star Wars was the film that kind of began to put an end to title sequences.
Oh. Yeah, right. Well, and here we get all of the credits in the opening because when the movie ends, that's it. You know, it just shuts off.
That's Phoenix, Arizona, where I'm at right now, and it's 112 toasty degrees over here. So I'm not wearing any pants for this commentary.
But don't you wish that your traffic was like that though?
Yeah.
That looks really nice.
Well, last weekend I went to Old Town Scottsdale, and there was nobody around in a radius of like 2 miles. We were going to the Contemporary Museum of Contemporary Art, and in Old Town Scottsdale, like full on noon, there was nobody around. Just some cars going by every once in a while, because who can walk outside when it's 112 degrees,
Yeah.
Yep. And this is actually, the hotel is located at 101 South Central Avenue in Phoenix, Arizona. I love the way that the camera pans into this hotel room.
Yeah, you have to kind of wonder how they did that back then.
Well, there's cuts. It's not a continuous shot. So
yeah. Well, I mean, just lowering the camera and pushing it in towards the window, just the physical way how they did that with the camera.
Yeah. And at first, it looks like this is an adulterous scene that we're going to be introduced in here.
Yeah, because they're meeting on her lunch hour in a hotel.
Yeah.
Which this is pretty racy for a 1960 movie.
Yes.
Sure.
this is actually, I believe, the first movie that ever showed a toilet on film. And that was a point of contention.
Oh man,
A working toilet.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true. People don't go to the bathroom in movies.
Yeah.
It's funny because in that book that Truffaut did interviewing Hitchcock, he said something about that Jean Duché, a French film critic, wrote that since John Gavin, who plays her lover, is stripped to the waist, but Janet Leigh wears a brassiere, the scene is only satisfying to one half of the audience.
No.
And then Hitchcock said, in truth, Janet Leigh should not have been wearing a brassiere. He says he could see nothing immoral about the scene, and he gets no special kick out of it, but the scene would have been more interesting if the girl's bare breasts had been rubbing against the man's chest, which I can't disagree. Oh, boy. You know, I grew up watching, I think my first introduction to Hitchcock might have been the TV show that he had where you would get that music track with the march of, I forgot what the title
Alfred
is.
Hitchcock Presents, I think it was.
Yeah. Where you get that and then you see the silhouette and he shows up as good evening. I used to watch that in black and white on TV.
And there was an 80s remake of that show too. Like there was an 80s reboot, Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
I think it's interesting that we're going to go from this super sunny, super like suburban, Phoenix daytime to, later in the movie, it's going to go really dark and really stormy. And yeah. And it's going to go to the nocturnal side of the story.
So he's visiting from, where is he visiting from? She has to drive like 2 days or something to get there.
Maybe California.
Maybe
I think it says Fairville, California.
Oh, okay.
Well, I got the script right here, so let me check that.
Yeah.
And a little bit of trivia. The character was supposed to be called Mary Crane, but there was already a lady called Mary Crane in Phoenix, so they changed it to Marion Crane.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I found that on
in the phone book.
I guess. It's one of those little bits of trivia.
Yeah.
So he's got money problems because he's got alimony and all that stuff, and he's living in the back room at a grocery store or a convenience store, and so this is going to be the what's going to push her into committing a theft. Of course, this is, I mean, if you haven't seen the movie yet, I mean, go watch the movie before listening to this because we're going to spoil the heck out of the movie. We're already started.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that Norman Bates is the killer and stuff. Oh, there's Hitchcock's cameo right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Hitchcock's daughter as well.
Oh,
really?
I didn't know that.
Yes.
So she's coming back from work, and I love the millionaire that shows up.
Oh my God,
this
it's so
scene.
irritating.
You know what he reminds me of? He reminds me of that Simpsons character, Richard Rich Texan.
Yeah, that fires his guns in the air for no reason.
Yeah. Because he looks just like him. Mm-hmm. It might actually be inspired by him.
Yeah.
And there he is. I also listened to bits and pieces of the commentary track for this. So, yeah.
Who was doing the commentary?
Oh, there's a bunch of it wasn't the commentary track. I mean, the making of. There was a bunch of people, including Clive Barker. He actually had, showed up in the making of Psycho.
Cool.
Yeah, from '97.
Huh.
And Clive had some things to say about it. It's a funny thing because I think Vera Miles plays the sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had something here in my notes. Vera Miles was groomed for the part in Vertigo, and she became pregnant prior to that. And Hitchcock got rather upset with Vera, but she came back on Psycho to play the sister. Yep.
He's trying so hard to impress her too, just by showing off how rich he is.
Yeah, just waving the money in her face.
I know.
It's like he's
literally,
begging her to steal it. Yes.
And he tells her that the money can buy off unhappiness.
Yeah.
And even this scene here just says, "I never carry more than I'm willing to lose."
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're actually like getting the audience to not be bothered when she steals from him, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so that you still think of her as the hero of the story, even though she's doing something that's unethical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to her, it's like her boyfriend won't marry her because he's too poor, and so this is her way of getting him to marry her.
And he's looking at her up and down, and he's kind of towering over her. He's kind of being a little, lecherous here.
Yeah, leaning over her desk. No, he was sitting on her desk.
That's where the directing comes in, because the language of cinema is Hitchcock works it so well. I mean, this is the work of a master in terms of that he makes us feel things just by the way the characters are put in the mise en scène.
Yeah.
You get the authority figure is going to be filmed from below, and then he's going to lumber over her. And then, when a character takes agency in the scene, the focus changes, or they get up, or they move forward a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's all part of the directing.
Yeah. He does a lot of long cuts too. I mean, long scenes of tracking the characters. I thought that was funny where she said he was flirting with you. I guess he must have noticed my wedding ring.
I gotta say though, I love this wood paneled office. I love the whole style of the because this movie is from 1960.
Yeah.
I think one of the first movies that Hitchcock did was actually a movie about Jack the Ripper. It's called The Lodger. It was like made in 1926.
Jeez.
No, wait, that's not right. The Lodger is from. I know that he was 26 years old when he made it. That's what I was going to say.
Oh.
Yep.
She spends a lot of time with her shirt off.
And now she's got a black brassiere instead of a white one. I don't know if there's any symbolism in that.
Oh yeah, that very well could be with Hitchcock. You never put it past him.
Oh, that she's doing something evil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or it may just be because it's Phoenix, Arizona, and you got to take 2 showers a day. She ended up receiving some awards for this. Let me see. For her performance in this movie, she received a Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actress and was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress.
So later on, when her boss sees her in the car, it would be pretty weird because she said she was going to go home and go to bed. Yeah. But instead, she went home, changed her clothes, and got in the car and started driving.
It's a funny scene when the boss is crossing the street and looks at her and sees her there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of reminds me of that scene in Pulp Fiction when
right.
Marcellus Wallace is crossing the street.
Yeah. And Bruce Willis runs him over.
Yeah, yeah. Which, knowing Tarantino, he might as well be referencing Psycho.
Oh, yes. Everything he does is an homage to something.
Yeah.
It's interesting that so many of this movie just relies on scenes with no dialogue, but it's just the way it's shot and the performance of the character makes us also try to guess what she's thinking, and we understand. She's thinking maybe I should take the money, maybe I shouldn't take the money, and you feel that anxiety, the struggle.
It's all this all inner conflict. I mean, you have the image of her just a few seconds ago, looking at herself in the mirror and looking back at the money. Yeah. Essentially trying to figure out what she wants to do. And even as she's driving and she's hearing all the voices in her head, it's still that inner struggle of, is she doing the right thing or,
Yeah. Yeah, those inner voices that's a little jarring because it's not something you really see in movies very much.
And that was
imagining what people are going to say.
Yep. And seems like there are some more locations here. That one where she sees the boss, it's also in Phoenix. It's in downtown Phoenix, South Central Avenue and Adams Street.
Oh.
Yep. And then when she's intercepted by the police, that's actually a road in California, Gorman Post Road.
Oh.
In Gorman, California.
So was it that policeman that's stalking her at the car dealership? Is that this same guy?
Yes, it's the same officer.
Yeah, he seems like a kind of a jerk.
He's kind of representing this authority figure. It's there, I think, more to introduce anxiety into the.
Yes.
Yeah.
This looming fear of getting caught or.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't understand why she decided to stop on the side of the road to take a nap, to be honest. I mean,
it shows that she was getting tired and
yeah,
dozing off at the wheel. But just even the officer himself is almost like this blank slate because you can't see into his eyes. He's wearing the sunglasses.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And so all you're looking at is the glasses. You don't see the soul behind it, which adds even more to the authoritarian.
And then the close up, right? The close up that we get of him.
Yeah, versus the close up of her where her eyes are huge, like she's just terrified.
Yep. So, am I detained or am I free to go?
Yeah.
And it all adds up because, she's seen by the boss, and now this policeman, stopped by and talked to her. And this is all making us think, she's leaving a trail of people that saw her. And, of course, Detective Arbogast is going to be following this trail later in the film. Yeah.
And the really sad thing is that she would have, we'll get to that a little later, but that she would have turned around and gone back and returned the money.
Yeah.
Minus $700 and $10 for the hotel.
Yeah, she does think about doing that when she's at the Bates Motel. Unfortunately, that she never gets a chance.
Yeah.
Some vintage cars here, huh?
Yes, and it's like, doesn't this officer have anything better to do with his day?
Yeah.
Than to stalk a single woman?
Yeah, and he gets off on a different exit than her, but he still kind of tracks her down anyway.
Yeah, at the dealership. Yeah.
One time Hitchcock talked about this scene in a movie that he did where there's a kid carrying a bomb across the city, and the bomb is supposed to blow at 1 o'clock, and then the audience knows that the bomb is there, it's going to explode, and then he deliberately made the time go past like 1 minute, 2 minutes, and then the bomb explodes in a bus, kills the kid, kills everybody. And that he said he went to a premiere of that movie, and that a critic came over with fists raised and said, "How dare you do something like that with a movie, huh?" And his interpretation was that the audience didn't feel like they got the release that they wanted, that what the audience wanted was the moment of tension to get released in a way that would leave everybody happy with how it was done. So they didn't expect the bomb to explode. They expected the bomb to be thrown out of the bus at some point and explode outside.
Yeah.
So it kind of subverted that safe, like when we go to a haunted, a haunt, you go in there, you get scared, but then you come out giggling because you got that release. Oh yeah, it's all behind me now.
I can see what I felt like that about Game of Thrones, when Ned, his head is on the chopping block and they go into slow motion, and in any other movie or whatever, you're expecting like the friends to come rescue him at the last minute.
Yeah, at the last minute. Yeah.
Yeah, and they set up the shot just like that, with his daughter watching out of the audience, and it goes in slow motion, and then he just dies.
I know a lot of people got so angry at that they stopped watching the show.
I consider
they were like, "Oh God, yeah."
And I've only seen 4 seasons of it. I haven't seen the whole thing. What's
amazing is that the story of Marion Crane here. It's according to Hitchcock himself, it's kind of a red herring because the story is not going to be a whodunit in the sense that it's going to be it's going to be about the $40,000. No, it's actually not. It's going to switch gears pretty quickly.
Well, he introduces the MacGuffin of the money, and I mean, at the halfway point, you can even see the moment where Hitchcock is saying, "Oh, this is irrelevant. It's not about this."
Yeah. Yeah, and if Arbogast had figured that out, then he probably wouldn't have died.
Yeah.
Yep. And here's another moment where the guy's like, "Hey, I don't want any trouble,"
Yeah.
Although it's kind of useless to trade the car because the cop's right there. He's looking at her. He's seeing what she's doing. So yeah.
But again, I mean, it's just representative also of just her guilty conscience. Just this thing always looming in the back of her mind that she can never live the life that she wants to live because she'll always have this weighing on her conscience.
Yeah.
Also, the photography in this movie is just beautiful. The way everything is lit, even the outside scenes, everything is properly lit and just so clear.
Yeah. The usual day and a half to think it over. No, salesmen don't do that anymore.
Oh,
Thank
no.
God. What would it take to get you into this car right now?
Yeah.
You can't leave here without buying something.
Oh, yeah. You can fit so many $40,000 packages inside this car. So the script was written in the draft that I'm actually following here as well as the movie. It's from a revised draft from December 1959, and it was written by Joseph Stefano, based on the novel by Robert Bloch. But he took out a lot of stuff that was in the book. For example, Norman Bates' character, he drank a lot. The mother would pop out when he was drunk.
Oh, wow.
So they took that out for this one, and he had an obsession with pornography and other stuff like that. The book actually opens with the character of Norman Bates reading a story, and they completely switched. The character of Marion is only in the book for maybe 2 chapters out of the 17.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, wow. So it focuses more on Norman?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what also makes it that much more convincing that Mother is a real character. Because Norman leads you to believe that she is alive and is there.
And the movie cheats a little bit with that too, because when you hear them arguing with each other, that is clearly not Anthony Perkins' voice.
Yeah. So I mean, you have to have some sort of suspension of disbelief that the novel definitely is able to do with more ease.
Mm-hmm.
In that Truffaut book where he's interviewing Hitchcock, he asks him at one point, so Truffaut didn't like the book at all. He says the book is it's not good, and he didn't like it, and he thinks the book is actually even dishonest in the way that it represents, scenes where it says what the mother is doing while she's talking to him and all that, and he said, why did you that doesn't work very well literally, but it works well cinematically. When you hear like the voice of the mother talk and all that, and he asks Hitchcock, why did you, decide to go with this book? Did you read the book? What attracted you to the story? And I think that Hitchcock said something like, well, there was a murder in a bathtub, and that kind of stood out for me. And he said, how do you make such a good movie out of a bad book? He says, well, you start by not reading the book. he said he didn't read the book. Yeah. Oh. He just had like someone, give him like a rundown of the book, and he just liked the scene that was a murder in the shower in a bathtub.
It was, I think, the same for Blade Runner, that he kind of only skimmed through Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
Ridley Scott,
Yeah.
And they made a great movie.
Yeah.
It's also a good story, don't get me wrong, but yeah.
It's very different, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't get any of that part where there's that little device that has the man going up the mountain, being hit with stones and all that stuff. Yeah, all that religious part of it. That was completely taken out.
Yeah.
And the way that people would raise like artificial animals on their terraces.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
And as you see, she continues to drive, and the camera is going to get closer and closer and closer to her face as it gets darker and darker and darker. There's a philosopher and a movie critic called Slavoj Žižek, and he talks about Marion Crane and Anthony Perkins being like two sides of this Mobius strip, where at one point in the movie, we go from one side of the strip into the next one, which is kind of the dark side, the nocturnal side. And Marion kind of switches places with Anthony Perkins' character, Norman Bates. Yeah. This kind of represents, her descent into like the darker parts of our psyche. She even starts smiling at one point because she's like becoming more comfortable, thinking that she got away with it. And she's like, you know what? I'm just going to embrace it. I stole it, and I'm going to go for it. And she has a smile in one of these sequences here closer coming up, which kind of mirrors the smile that Norman Bates does at the end of the movie when he's in the holding cell.
There is something to that about thinking that she got away with it, because that cop managed to find her at the auto dealership, but then she just drove off, and he's like, well, I give up. Where did he go? Why didn't he follow her?
Yeah.
And so now that it's beginning to rain, her vision of what she's doing begins to obscure more. She goes from smiling and thinking, yeah, okay, so maybe I am going to do this and maybe I'm going to get away with it, to just completely living in this this chaotic thing. And the use of rain, which is usually something of purification and of cleansing, which we will see later. Here it's to essentially show her journeying into the underworld, of which she doesn't know she's journeying into yet.
Yeah, and the camera keeps getting closer and closer to her face.
I had a psychology class where they used movies to describe the different psychological approaches. So for Psycho, we did psychoanalysis, and then for Jungian, it was Empire Strikes Back, where Luke goes into the cave and confronts the dark side of himself, and then I think behaviorism was Clockwork Orange.
That'd be perfect. Yeah,
I tried to find my paper for that, but that was from like 94, so I just couldn't find it. I think it was it would have been on an old floppy disk somewhere.
The way he subverted expectations here was Hitchcock mentioned in the Truffaut interview, the public always likes to be one step ahead of the story. They like to feel they know what's coming next. So you deliberately play upon this fact to control their thoughts. The more we go into the details of the girl's journey, the more the audience becomes absorbed in her flight. Mm-hmm. That's why so much is made of the motorcycle cop and the change of the cars. And when Anthony Perkins tells the girl of his life in the motel and they exchange views, you still play upon the girl's problem. It seems as if she's decided to go back to Phoenix and give the money back. And it's possible the public anticipates by thinking, this young man is influencing her to change her mind. You turn the viewer in one direction and then another, and you keep them as far as possible from what's actually going to happen.
Yeah, well, I wonder how involved he was with developing the script from the book then. Because there's a screenwriter too. I mean,
I'm sure Hitchcock was very involved, though.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I do believe this is the first film that just kills off its heroine halfway through.
Yeah.
And not only does Hitchcock subvert audience expectations, but the fact that he took a book that was viewed as schlock, and he had so many people telling him not to do it, and he subverted expectations and made it something that exceeded the source material.
Was it critically well received at the time? I mean, I know now that people think of it as a masterpiece, but I wonder at the time how people felt about it.
I do believe so. I know that. So, for example, the Clive story that you guys told in the beginning, that that he came, because films back then would just be shown essentially on repeat. Mm-hmm. And you didn't have to follow the story because there were no twists and turns. You could just essentially go and sit in whenever you wanted to, and you wouldn't really be missing much. And Psycho was the first film that I know, at least in the States, Hitchcock said, no, you have to be in at this time. And if you aren't here at the time it starts, then you're not allowed until the next showing. You can't just come in the middle like people were wont to do back in those days.
Like Clive Barker did.
Yes, exactly.
Another reason why the patrol, the cop, it seems so overbearing in that scene with Janet Leigh is because there's a funny story. I was watching the Dick Cavett interview with Hitchcock, and Hitchcock was apparently kind of afraid of the police. And this came from like an experience he had when he was a kid. He did something his dad didn't like him, some small misdemeanor. And so his dad took him down to the police station. And this policeman put him inside a cell for like 5 minutes. And ever since then, he was always very afraid of the police, even as an adult. And he did mention that he thought that once he remembered that might have been at the root of his fear, that it might have gone away. But he's like, I'm still terrified of the police.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his filmography, there's never really anyone of authoritative power that is a good person. Usually, almost always, the hero or heroine of his films are on the run from the law. That the law has misinterpreted what they've done, and they're too trying to catch them like the bad guys are.
I'm trying to think if there are other Hitchcock movies that I've seen. This might be the only one.
Like North by Northwest, Strangers on a Train.
Mm-hmm.
The only one that I can think of I think the only one I could think of where the officers actually helped save the day, I believe, is Rear Window. But it's been a while since I've seen these films, so.
Here's a small quote from Clive Barker from the Making of Psycho section that he's in. He says about the character of Norman Bates, what I think the movie does spectacularly well and perversely is bring a curious glamour to the character of Norman Bates. In the book, he's this pudgy, rather nondescript, short, balding man. Of course, in the movie, it's one of the great performances of cinema and the defining performance of Anthony Perkins' career. Mm-hmm. One of those performances everybody knows, even if you've never seen the movie. Everybody knows Norman Bates.
Yeah. And poor Anthony Perkins got stereotyped after this film as essentially only playing this character.
Yeah, like Adam West or Christopher Reeve.
And he comes back for Psycho 2 and Psycho 4.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Marcus, have you seen any of those sequels?
No, I have not.
I haven't either.
I know Mick Garris directed Psycho 4, and I want to say that Anthony Perkins, didn't he direct Psycho 3?
Oh. But he wasn't was he in it?
I am unsure.
I can check that real quick.
Yeah. We have the internet available to us.
I hope I'm not mistaken.
Okay, Psycho 3. Oh, wow. That's a crazy synopsis. Norman Bates falls in love with a fallen nun who stays at the Bates Motel. Meanwhile, mother is still watching. Director, Anthony Perkins. You're right.
Oh, wow. Okay. Did he also act in it or no?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Huh. Mm-hmm. So he was in all 4 of the movies then.
Gosh. And I know that maybe it's the second one or whatever, but he shows up like he's out of the mental institution and there's something going on and everybody thinks it's going to be him that's doing the killings. And I don't remember much more after that. But you know what? Now I'm curious about watching the other sequels.
Yeah. We'll have to decide here after this what we're going to do next for our audio.
I'm going to take a quick break because my cats are fighting, but keep talking.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering what that sound was.
Oh.
Yeah, what Jose was talking about his performance, it is pretty amazing. It feels like he's always like choking something back or he's holding back.
Yeah, but at the same time, you do sympathize for him.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's another red herring of you don't suspect him to be the monster that he is.
Right, because it's not him, it's his mother.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, to him, it's like he's just covering for the crimes. He's not actually committing them.
Yeah. And that's what you're led to believe for so long until that very shocking.
Yeah.
And one thing I really love about Norman's office is all the taxidermy that you have. All these taxidermied birds that are just looming, especially the owl. You have such a strong light casting this long shadow on the owl, which
there it is.
It just looks like the owl is swooping down to grab prey, which leads into what Jose said about this nocturnal feel. And even Norman says something a line about she eats like a bird or something, and her name is her name is Marion Crane. So all of these things are alluding to the fact that Norman is quite possibly gonna taxidermy her like he did with all the animals, with all the birds.
Hey guys, I'm back.
All the cats okay?
Yeah, the cats are okay. It's just, they were fighting. There's cat hair everywhere. It seems like it's like the shower scene, but with cats.
Okay.
No blood though. That's good.
Chocolate syrup everywhere.
And so the motel and the actual California Gothic, or like some people call California gingerbread house, that is actually in the Universal Studios backlot.
Yes, it is. If you take the tram tour, you can see both the house and the hotel. And during the day, they'll actually have someone dressed up as Norman Bates holding a knife, standing there, and he'll start running at the tram with the knife as you drive by.
Oh, my God.
That's kind of hokey.
Yeah, it's very hokey, but, it's fun.
I don't think Alfred Hitchcock would have approved of that.
A funny thing I think you guys might have been talking about when I got back was about taxidermy.
Yeah.
And Hitchcock said in an interview that Anthony Perkins' character, Norman Bates, was supposed to have taxidermied his own mother with sawdust. He mentions that in an interview.
Yeah. I mean, he was even just gently stroking the taxidermied bird on his right whilst staring at Marion while she's eating. It's this very odd thing.
Yeah.
And of course, Ed Gein kind of did something similar to his own mother. And he, this is terrible to say, but he would go into the graveyard and rob a couple of women graves, and he would peel off their faces and stuff them with paper and mount them on the wall like a trophy.
Ugh.
Yeah, he also, I believe, he would cut off their genitalia and wear it in women's underwear as well.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, and he had a necklace made out of nipples and stuff like that. It was of course, it's much more. It's still over the top, but it's closer to like Leatherface and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, at least in terms of the house and the decorations inside the house. Yeah. Than this. This is very, very far from what Ed Gein did.
It's also a little. This scene starts to get a little unsettling because you start to see cracks in his character, and like he's not really exactly what he says. Like he said, "Well, I'm going to make a sandwich because I'm hungry." And he goes, and we can eat together. And then when he gets down there, and she said, "Well, I'm not hungry anyway." And then he gets down there and he says, "You eat. I'm not hungry."
Yeah.
And here she's going to start taking control of the conversation and start talking to him like showing almost like a kind of a pity, like, oh, you should, because they were just talking about being born in a trap.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, I don't mind. And she's like, well, you should. And she's going to start telling him to defy his mother and all that. She's kind of telling him what to do. And he's going to be a little defensive, but then she's going to mention, have you ever thought about putting her someplace?
Yeah.
And they already switched the shot here to shoot him from below.
Yes.
And there's the bird up there.
Yeah.
And this is where, and this is where he's,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and of course, you know, there's another shot coming up where he's going to start moving forward a little bit on the scene, and he's going to start talking down to her, and he's going to take control back in the conversation.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing with how Hitchcock shoots and frames things, is that most of the conversation in the beginning, she's looking up at him, he's looking down at her, but right when she begins to take control, like you said, the shot did change, but when you start seeing the cracks in the facade that is Norman, you have that image, that looming image of the owl waiting to swoop down and grab its prey in the background.
Oh, yeah. Well put. Norman Bates kind of looks like a young Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, he does.
And one other thing is that I know a lot of the paintings that are hanging in the background have symbolic meaning to the actual story, especially the painting that we later see with the peephole. But the meanings and the illusions and all that escapes me right now.
Well, there's some scenes where you're going to see them walking in front of mirrors, and there's kind of this mirror duality between Norman Bates and Marion Crane. Even the names Norman and Marion are kind of similar.
Oh, yeah.
When you think about it, yeah. And there's a Venus of Urbino back there, where there's a couple of little angels showing Venus a mirror where she's looking at herself. So there's that mirror image there as well.
Which we got at the beginning when she was staring at herself with the money on the bed.
Yeah. Oh, here it is when he moves forward. You mean an institution? A madhouse? He's getting really defensive. I was going to be, no, I was talking about a retirement home, man.
Yeah.
Or an assisted living facility. There's plenty of those here in Phoenix for the snowbirds.
And in a way, he's kind of just this guilt that he feels is starting to bubble up, and he's going to, move it onto her. He's going to displace it because he murdered his mom. Right, so he can't bear the idea of somebody doing something detrimental to her.
Well, you could even look at it that that Norman is a down the road depiction of what Marion Crane could become if she were to keep harboring and living with such dark secrets. I mean, stealing money is one thing, but I mean, Norman is living with this enormous guilt that he did kill his mother, and his psyche goes to extremes to cover it up, but it's just kind of that he's a person who lives with these very dark secrets that no one is allowed to know. Yeah. And Marion is just starting down that path. Yeah. And you could almost say that perhaps the reason that she decides to have the turn of character and return the money the next day is something subconsciously sensing that from Norman. And
we all go a little mad sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And now that she stands up, the camera is looking up at her, so she has the dominance in the conversation, and the camera's looking down at him, making him appear weaker.
Yeah. And I think it's this point. It's probably this is what doomed her, right? Is that she made him, confess that I thought about it.
Yeah,
and then the mother side is gonna come out and go, no, you don't.
I love the shot where there's a big raven right there next to her.
Yeah,
like a carrion raver for Marion Crane.
Yes, yes.
We just had a thing happen today during our garage sale where our cat had gone across the street to the neighbor's house, and then these ravens started like dive bombing him, and he ran back home into the garage, and these ravens were like swooping down and squawking at him and dive bombing him and stuff.
You know, I read an article where it said that ravens can remember a person's face. If you throw a rock at a raven, it can not only remember that and dive bomb you, it can also tell other ravens that, teach them to dive bomb you as well because they see you as a threat.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is amazing. So the reason why we have this house here also is because this arsenal of terror that Hitchcock created, just like, the way the lamps are in a low table so they light up Norman Bates' face from below. And it makes it look more threatening in this shot. But also the house, the ghostly house, right? I mean, he says that Hitchcock said to Truffaut in the interview that the mysterious atmosphere is, to some extent, quite accidental. For example, the actual locale of the events is Northern California, where this type of house is really common. They're called California Gothic, or when they're particularly awful, they're called California Gingerbread. I did not set out to reconstruct an old-fashioned universal horror picture atmosphere. I simply wanted to be accurate, and there's no question, but that both the house and the motel are authentic reproductions of the real thing. I chose that house and motel because I realized if I had taken an ordinary low bungalow, the effect wouldn't have been the same. I felt the type of architecture would help the atmosphere of the yarn.
Well, the house has a really sort of gothic-y haunted house look to it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was the case back then or if everybody's just so used to, the Psycho house image that's sort of become, modeled later on.
Yeah.
And I think that house didn't really exist as it exists today at the Universal Studios, right? I think it might have been just like, you might have had just like the 3/4 view of the house, but the house might not have been an actual house.
Yeah, that's what I heard somewhere. I don't remember where I heard it from, if it was from Mick Garris or where, but yeah, they never actually constructed a full paneled house. It was always the 3/4. And so I don't know.
So these interior shots are probably done in a studio.
Oh yes. The house that they built, it was just a facade. It was just the facade of the walls.
Yeah.
So I don't know which Psycho the actual Psycho house that's on the Universal lot now is from. I don't know if it's from the first or one of the sequels or not, but the full paneled house is on the Universal lot now to go see.
So with her tearing up this paper, is she now changing her mind back again to, because it's like writing down how much she spent and how much she owes.
Yes,
Seems like
she's come to the conclusion that she doesn't want to go through with this plan anymore. She's going to come home. She's going to return the money, and so that's what that was, is her figuring out how much money she owes. But that's the whole point of the shower, is that she is now washing away her sin. She's cleansing herself. She's going to be purified. This is she's being reborn. This is her turn of character. And
then why did she tear up the paper, though? That kind of made it seem like she changed her mind back again.
I don't know. I just know that the whole point of the shower is for her to, it's supposed to be symbolic of purification. And
I think she's just not leaving any paper trail behind, and she's just thinking, okay, I've made up my mind, this is what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go and take a shower now. And what's interesting in this scene is that for a while it was rumored that Saul Bass had actually directed the shower scene, and then that was debunked by both Janet Leigh and Hitchcock himself. He said that he asked Saul Bass to kind of plan out this scene, and he made a sequence, but he didn't like it, so he didn't use it. And I think Saul Bass kind of made the storyboards as well for Hitchcock. And in this scene, it took 7 days to make the shower scene.
Oh God.
Yeah, 70 setups, and then they only used 45 seconds, which is amazing. And they shot some of these scenes in slow motion with a body double for Janet Leigh, who was a naked girl, so they could be able to make sure that they wouldn't film her breasts by accident. So they shot it in slow motion so they could have a let's see, what does he say here? Yeah, and this shot here is so iconic.
Oh yeah, the cross dissolve between the drain and her blood, literally her lifeblood going down the drain into her eye, her lifeless eye.
Which was Hershey chocolate syrup, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, in black and white movies like Night of the Living Dead and stuff, it's all just Hershey's chocolate syrup.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen the documentary 7852?
No.
It's a documentary that's entirely only focused on the shower scene, on what we saw of the stabbing in the shower scene, and it's like an hour and a half just deep dive documentary with a lot of really fantastic filmmakers, and they all just talk about the editing and the directing of this one scene here.
And you got this eye shot opening up, which we kind of see a mirror of that in Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, with the camera closing in on Kirsty's eye.
Yeah.
You remember that? That's kind of a similar shot there. And of course, for me, it always brings me back the idea of who shot Mr. Burns.
Right.
And so we have the camera focusing on the money again, which is Hitchcock going, okay, here's the MacGuffin again, trying to make you think like, okay, this is still going to be central to the story, even though the money from this point forward, the MacGuffin is worthless. It's pointless. We're going to see Norman throw it into the car, and it's going to be put in the swamp because that's not what this story's about.
But I guess at this point, if you hadn't seen the movie before, you would be wondering if he's going to take it or
So it still makes people think, oh, this is going to be about the money, and it's totally not. Nobody cares about the money anymore. But one of the dead giveaways for me when I saw this movie again was that Anthony Perkins comes out of the house yelling, "Mother, mother, blood, blood." And it's like, he's up there. He has not seen anything about this. How does he know that there's blood? How does he know what happened? So
on his clothes, I think.
Well, I think,
or on her clothes, I guess it would.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be that he saw blood on her clothes to make you think that the mother.
Oh, I see. That would be okay. And here's the part that Hitchcock talks about this. He said, took us 7 days to shoot that scene. There were 70 camera setups for 45 seconds of footage. We had a torso specially made up for that scene with the blood that was supposed to spurt away from the knife, but we didn't use it. I used a live girl instead, a naked model who stood for Janet Leigh. We only showed Miss Leigh's hands, shoulders, and head. All the rest was a stand-in. Naturally, the knife never touched the body. And that's great, because a lot of people swear that they see stabbing.
To this day, they say that there's some sort of penetration when there's nothing.
I just watched it twice, and you never see the knife go in.
Yeah,
right.
It's all
done in the montage. Yeah. And he said, I shot some of it in slow motion so as to cover the breasts. The slow shots were not accelerated later on because they were inserted in the montage so as to give an impression of normal speed. And so what's the name of that documentary again, Marcus?
7852.
Okay, I got something to add here.
Is that the time code in the movie when that shower scene starts?
I think it's the number of frames that are in that scene.
Oh,
fascinating. And this scene goes on forever. It goes on for almost 10 minutes, like cleaning the murder scene.
Yeah.
And there's something kind of satisfying about this scene. It's like it's telling you that, this is how you make the perfect crime, I guess.
Yeah.
Or at least try to make the perfect crime.
Yeah.
I always wonder how they made that shot. And this is kind of a small thing to bring up, but the shot when she's in the shower where you see the shower head throw the water directly at the camera? I wonder how they did that. I wonder how they did that, because you don't see the water hitting the actual lens.
Yeah, I don't know.
Isn't there a Bates Motel TV series?
Yeah, it went on for a good amount of time. I want to say maybe 5 or 6 seasons, if not more.
Did it take place before these events or after?
So most of it was technically a prequel. It's its own thing. It takes place during modern day and such.
Oh, really?
And then so most of it was a prequel, and then the final season essentially is a remake, quote unquote remake of Psycho, but it's its own take, and it's actually a pretty good show. I recommend it.
And he just cleans everything, and it takes like 10 minutes.
Well, you can tell that he's done this before. There's
that's what I was kind of getting at. Is like, does he have a history of do they have a history of him and his mother side of killing their tenants?
Well, yeah. I think you hear later that they're.
Oh, there were missing people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, watching him, it's almost cathartic of a therapeutic thing for him to be cleaning.
Yeah.
There's not much. It doesn't seem like he's too worried about what he's doing. Yeah. He's very methodical in it. So, yeah, this isn't his first time.
That's an excellent point. And this is all in the actual script that I'm looking at. This is just like maybe a couple of paragraphs.
Like even the idea of driving to the car to the swamp and all that, it's just you can just tell that he's done this before.
Yeah.
Like when he's watching the car go into the swamp, he's sitting there chewing candy and just kind of smiling about it and stuff.
Yeah.
And when Marion dies, and she dies in that tremendous close-up of her eye, and then the story it's like the story kind of comes out of her body, and she becomes just a secondary actor now, and it goes towards the money and towards the house, and now Norman Bates is the main character.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is what's going to take over the story from now on.
It's a beautiful transition too.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys have seen Death Proof by Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's another film that he takes homage from. In that film, you follow a group of girls for half of the movie, thinking it's about them, and all of a sudden they're all murdered by Stuntman Mike. And then you start following Stuntman Mike and seeing that he had that wasn't his first time, and so that movie does the same thing of halfway through it changes movies essentially, that your heroines are killed off and it changes movies.
Or Nightbreed, right? I mean, Aaron Boone.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's a very excellent point.
I think Aaron Boone is the main character at the start, but then it really is it really switches to Laurie.
Yeah, to Laurie. Yeah. Excellent point.
It's kind of a mirror image of this, because Boone is the tortured guy with mental problems seeing a doctor, and then it changes to the girl. Yeah. Uh-huh. I never thought about that, Ryan. You completely
wonderful point.
Wow.
And you could even say that Decker is like Norman, because Decker, he talks to his masks in Cabal in a very similar way that Norman talks to his mother.
Right.
Because they talk back.
And Decker feels like it's not me, it's him,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also a character who's running around with a knife.
Yeah.
And all these bird images.
Yes. To hammer that home. And then here we have the money, and he doesn't know what's money. He thinks it's just newspaper, and he just throws it away.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which it would feel a lot different than just a newspaper, but then at the same time, he's got other things on his mind right now.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter anymore. It's no longer that story.
Yeah.
Well, isn't the newspaper still in there?
Yeah, it's still in there. If I remember, I thought he throws it in the car. I thought it goes in the car.
Well, let's see. Because they just showed it.
Yeah, it's still on the nightstand, right?
Yeah.
There's a theory about the Bates Motel.
I think this is where he gets it. Yeah, and he throws it back in the car, and so it goes in the swamp with the car.
There's a theory about the house that oversees the Bates Motel, that because it's got a basement, ground floor, and first floor, and that the ground floor is the ego, the first floor is the super ego, and the basement represents the id of Norman Bates' personality.
Interesting. Okay.
There he just
I love
grabbed it.
that. Yeah.
Well, geez, I mean, that's totally Freudian.
So mother is on the first floor, which represents the super ego, like the kind of obscene, impulsive super ego. And then the ground floor is the, regular Norman Bates, like, hey, your sandwiches and milk.
Yeah.
And then the cellar, of course, is where the secret is hidden.
Yeah.
So when he puts her into the cellar, then he's kind of going into id mode.
And there's even a funny scene where you hear the mother, I don't think we've seen that yet, but the mother is saying, "What are you taking me? You're taking me to the fruit cellar? What do you think? I'm fruity?"
Yeah. When he's carrying her, it has that high above shot.
Yeah.
When he's running down the stairs carrying her, and you can hear her yelling that.
And Hitchcock explained why he used that high shot. And that was also so he could do the Detective Arbogast killing.
Yes.
He used a shot from above so he wouldn't show the mother from behind, because it would seem like he was hiding her deliberately. So he decided to go with a high shot, because that way we still can't see that it's Anthony Perkins. And that's why he used that high shot. He thought it would be, too deliberate to obscure her just by filming from behind. So, yeah. And there's a moment here where it's like, is it going to go down? Is it not going to go down?
Yeah.
It introduces this tension. And we almost root for Norman Bates, like, oh, man, that car better go down. Otherwise, it's going to get caught.
Yeah.
And then he gets that smile, right, when it starts going down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you actually root for the car to go down. You're identifying with a killer who's trying to obscure, like, the proof of his murder. It's very perverse. It makes us kind of be in it with Anthony Perkins. And it's like, yep, that's it.
Yeah.
And this is her fiance, I think, or is it the sister? Yeah, the fiance.
Yeah. So he lives in the back room of this hardware store?
Apparently.
And I love that the name Sam Loomis was later reused in John Carpenter's Halloween.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Such an old styley hardware store.
It seems like Loomis never gets a chance to be sad. Once they figure out that she's dead, he's just investigating, and I don't know. It never really dawns on him like, yo, yeah, she's dead.
You always have that denial. I think he's more angry that this happened, or angry, or confused and disoriented, like, because she never told him anything.
Yeah.
Marion's sister. And here's Detective Arbogast.
Yeah.
We're going to get a big, clear shot of him pretty soon.
Yeah, he walks right into the camera.
Yeah.
That's okay, Sam. I brought my own lunch. I'll be happy to just sit right here.
Here it is. Hey. And someone asked, I think it was Truffaut in that book, someone asked, why do they bring in a private investigator? Why don't they bring in the police or the sheriff? And he's like, well, because it's boring. If they had just brought in the police. So he just brings this character in because it's more interesting that way.
Well, and they explain it in the movie.
That they didn't want to involve the cops and stuff.
They wanted her to return the money and then everything.
No charges. Yeah. It might also speak of, Hitchcock's reluctance to bring the police into this because he's afraid of the police. Well, not afraid, but yeah. He kind of opens up the game real quick, right? I mean, for a private investigator, he just walks in there and tells them exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Remember when you could buy a pound of sugar or a shotgun at the same store?
Well, I think
And
you still can at like Fred Meyer or Walmart.
Turpentine and
Yeah,
wallpaper.
Walmart.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember Super Walmart. They had from baby cots to coffins.
Coffins, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. At one point, they had coffins at Walmart. Not all WalMarts, but
Yeah.
God.
That's crazy. And here's the trail. The boss saw her, and then the cops saw her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get the montage of him finding all the different leads.
Yeah.
The scene where Arbogast is going to get murdered was a rear projection scene.
Yes, when he's falling down the staircase, which is another Hitchcock staple that's used in several of his films, most notably in Vertigo.
Vertigo, yeah. When someone's holding on to one of those president's giant faces. That's the movie, right? I think I haven't seen Vertigo in a while.
That's North by Northwest.
North by Northwest.
Yes.
Okay,
no,
gotcha.
Vertigo. He goes to a mission and I believe falls from like a bell tower or something, and that's what. But
I need to watch these movies again. Yeah, those movies are really good. I need to refresh myself on that.
Have you guys seen Strangers on a Train?
No.
No, I haven't.
That is by far my favorite Hitchcock film. I highly recommend that. Have you guys seen Horrible Bosses? I know this is off topic, but
maybe
it's a comedy, but they steal the premise from Strangers on a Train, in that two strangers meet on a train, and
okay, and they decide to kill someone, but switch the person. Yes. Gotcha. Okay, so there's no motive linking to either of them.
Yeah.
Okay, I've heard of it. Because there's the things about a murder is you need to have the motivation, you need to have the opportunity, and there's something else I forget.
Yeah. So it being somebody that has no relation to anything would be the perfect crime.
Right.
And so here when we see Norman, now he is wearing all black, which alludes to what you said earlier, Jose, about her wearing the black bra.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so now that we've seen him commit the crime, now he is the one that.
Yeah.
I wonder how he made a living, because that motel is always empty.
Yeah.
I got a black kitty here on my desk as I'm watching the movie. She's just kind of recovering from the struggle that she had with the other cat. Oh. There's tufts of hair coming out of her. I particularly like this actor in some of the Twilight Zone episodes that he's in.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering why he looked familiar. That's what it's from.
Yeah.
Okay. I think one of Norman's tics is that he likes to chew on candy when he gets nervous, because he's chewing on candy now while he's watching the detective go through all the different bookings, and he did the same thing when he was watching the car go into the swamp.
So now that he's figured it out, he's gonna suddenly remember. Oh yeah, no, I did see her.
Of course.
So Janet Leigh had something to say about Anthony Perkins later in interviews and the making of Psycho. She said, Anthony Perkins, well, he was just a master. It was a joy to come to work. There was always an excitement for me. You knew what you wanted to bring to the scene, but the excitement was you didn't know what he was going to bring. Obviously, what he brought then sparked more from you in response. And so it was just a wonderful experience, the anticipation of what was going to happen. What more were we going to get today than we thought was there? He had a wonderful sense of humor, wonderful sense of humor. Very dry, you know. He was a good friend. He was a wonderful husband, dear and loving father. I mean, he was not Norman Bates, but he was just so brilliant that the people said, yes, you are. You are too, Norman Bates. And like you said, he got typecast. Right?
Yeah.
I thought I'd heard, was he difficult to work with later on? I thought I'd heard from Mick Garris that he was difficult.
I think so, but I mean, it's probably because he was angry at the fact that his career, for the rest of his career, he was essentially typecast as this one character.
Yeah.
Which is why, because I know that he wanted to branch out in his career, and that's why he directed Psycho 3. But I think that's the most critically underwhelming film out of the series, and so that's why they pass it off to Mick Garris for Psycho 4.
And here's an interesting shot about the house, the house that overlooks Norman Bates's motel. When she arrives at the motel, it's a big storm, right? So Hitchcock said one night they were in the back lot, was early in production, and Hilton Green, I think, was the assistant director. And he was filming with Hitchcock, and they're all set to run the cameras, and Janet Leigh drives up to the motel at night. It's pouring rain, and Norman comes out the stairs. And then Hitchcock says, cut. And he said, Hilton, you didn't prepare this very well. And Hilton Green asked, what's wrong? And he pointed up, and sure enough, there was coming up over the house in the back lot of Universal, a full moon, clear sky. And he said, here we are in a big rainstorm and the moon in the background. I had done everything but looked at the charts and found out when the full moon was. So what we did in a hurry, to this day I'll never forget, the wonderful grip crew we had. We had 2 grips with a century stand and a long pole and some blacks. They followed that moon all night and blocked it out from the camera.
Oh, wow.
That's funny.
So they had someone actually hold some poles with black cloth and block the moon from the shot.
Wow.
Which is crazy when you think about it. Yeah. And that was Anthony Perkins' idea that you were talking about, because food in Hitchcock's pictures was always very important. And this is from the assistant director, Hilton Green again, said, going back to many of his movies, you'll find that there's a correlation between food and some part of the plot. He interwove eating scenes or discussing it with what was going on on the screen. And then Tony Perkins, it was his idea, I believe, of the Halloween candy that he was always eating throughout the movie.
Okay, maybe that's to also show the fact that Norman still psychologically is a child. You know, he's not a mature adult. That he still almost has the mindset of a young man.
Because his mother doesn't want him to grow up.
Yeah.
So,
and then Arbogast, of course, noticed when Norman is going to show him one of the rooms that he hesitates at the first room and then goes to the next one down.
Yeah.
Which leads to his suspicions of Norman even more.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think kind of dictates a little bit the relationship between Norman and his mother when she was still alive was when he tells Marion's character that a boy's best friend is his mom.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a stifling thing to say, even though, offhand it sounds like, oh, yeah, that's a cute thing to say. But then when you think about it, like, well, yeah, but at some point you have to have other friends. You can't just be a mama's boy all the time.
Yeah.
And kind of Ed Gein had the same story with his mother. Apparently, his parents worked at, they had like one of the things that Ed Gein probably got very impressed at a young age was that one time he was told never to go into the back room where they killed animals and hung up meat. And one day his psychologist said that he went back there and he saw his mother coming out in an apron covered in blood. And that impressed him a lot. So that's probably one of the things that kind of started him down that, weird path of developing some sort of, like there's people who get off by seeing women step on bugs, for example. And that's probably because when they were kids, they saw their mom step on a spider or whatever, and that kind of stuck with them. And who knows where these paraphilias come from? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a mixture of nurture and nature.
Yes.
But yeah, the act of, when the police went to Ed Gein's house in Wisconsin, they found a lady that owned a store that he had shot with a .22 caliber gun, and he had brought her home, taken her head off, and dressed her like a deer and hung her in the barn. And then when they went in there, one of the policemen who found the actual body of that woman, he got sick and he didn't want to go back into the house after that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was Ed Gein. He's not a very good detective because he doesn't even want to see the mother, right?
Well, he
does, 'cause
he inquired about it, but Norman essentially told him that he needs a warrant for that.
But he's going to do it anyway, right? He's going to turn around and go back
into the house.
Yeah.
But Ed Gein, I mean, after that story broke, his story influenced so many films. I mean, even the Hannibal series is in part inspired by Ed Gein.
Mm-hmm. You mean the Hannibal character? The way that he grew up? I know that there's there's a TV show called Hannibal. I've never seen it, though. I've only seen the movies.
The show Hannibal is by far my favorite show of all time. Yeah,
I should get into that. I wonder if it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime.
It's on Amazon Prime. I actually just made Brenda watch it, and she fell in love with it too. So
I'll get into that.
Yeah,
I'm actually curious.
The first season is a very standard, just serial killer of the week type show. But then once season 2 kicks in, it gets very, very good.
Here's another scene where he's just using the direction to completely evoke feelings in the audience, like the shots of, seeing these animals and cutting back to him, and then an empty house. You get this unsettling feeling, like when you find yourself in a place at night which should be bustling with people, but it's completely empty. Like when you go to a Walmart at 3 a.m, like you and I did once, Ryan.
Yeah.
There's nobody there, and it's a super Walmart, and there's nobody there, and you're walking around, and it's feeling like, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah.
And in that moment of him looking in the safe, for the money, it's like that's kind of the fatal flaw in his whole plan, or his whole idea of what's happening, is not knowing that the money's not important, and believing that this mother is a real person that's alive. I mean, if he'd asked around a little bit about that, he might have learned that she's dead.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of the twist of Psycho, is that it's a twist that's so out there and outlandish and slightly absurd that you would never suspect that to be the case.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And this scene here with the murder of Arbogast, that was actually planned out by Saul Bass, who did the intro and some of the storyboards and stuff. He actually helped Hitchcock with this one, and he made he kind of blocked out the scene, and Hitchcock said that Saul Bass did only one scene. He was supposed to do the titles, but since he was interested in the picture, I let him lay out the sequence of the detective going up the stairs just before he's stabbed. One day during shooting, I came down with a temperature, and since I couldn't come to the studio, I told the cameraman and my assistant that they could use Saul Bass's drawings. Only the parts showing him going up the stairs before the killing. There was a shot of his hand on the rail and of feet seen in profile going up and through the bars of the balustrade. When I looked at the rushes of the scene, I found it was no good, and that was an interesting revelation for me, because as that scene was cut, it wasn't an innocent person, but a sinister man who was going up the stairs.
Oh,
wow.
Those cuts would have been perfectly all right if they were showing a killer, but they were in conflict with the whole spirit of the scene.
Yeah.
It looked like he twisted or broke his ankle when he was falling down the stairs, too.
Yeah. Yep. And then there was there was something on his face attached to a small fishing wire, and when the knife goes down, they kind of yank that thing, and that's when you see the slash across his face. That's how they did that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And he says here, when Arbogast goes up to the top step, I deliberately placed, this is Hitchcock saying in an interview with Truffaut, I deliberately placed the camera high for two reasons. The first was so that I could shoot down on top of the mother, because if I'd shown her back, it might have looked as if I was deliberately concealing her face, and the audience would have been leery. I used that high angle in order not to give the impression that I was trying to avoid showing her. But the main reason for raising the camera so high was to get contrast between the long shot and the close-up of the big head as the knife came down at him. It was like music, you see, the high shot with the violins, and suddenly the big head with the brass instruments clashing.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Put a plastic tube on his face with hemoglobin, and as the knife came up to it, we pulled the string, releasing the blood on his face down the line we'd traced in advance. Then he falls back on the stairway. And he was actually, rear projection like we were talking, and he was actually sitting on a very comfortable chair, just waving his arms, going like, whoa. And you guys remember The Omen, the scene where Damon, the kid, hits the mom on the stairs, and she kind of falls over the... Yeah. And that also has that scene where she's falling down, and you think, how did they do that? And she was actually on top of a board, and the board is going... She was actually standing up, and it was just backing against... Yeah, something that was made to look like the floor. Huh. And that's how they did that shot. She was just on a kind of a dolly thing.
Yeah.
And she was just attached to it, and that just pushed her back, and that's when it seems like she's falling. Yep. Yeah, only the old lady. That's a funny bit of trivia. Apparently, the Encyclopedia Britannica, the article about movie production, was written by Hitchcock. And that's when he's talking about, he used an example of movie production by talking about the movie about the window and the guy with the cast on his leg. What's that
Rear
called?
Window.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how you can show, how you can use, post-production and directing and all that to convey a certain feeling in a scene and then a completely different feeling using the same shots. Like you see the guy look through the binoculars and he sees like a mother nursing a child or something. And then it cuts to him smiling. And it's like, okay, so that's a benevolent kind of feeling you get out of it. It's like, oh, he's thinking, oh, that's cute. But then if you show him looking through the binoculars, you cut to a woman in a bikini and then you cut to him smiling, the same smile. It just sounds like he's a dirty old man all of a sudden. Yeah. Yeah.
And this deputy sheriff is pretty ineffectual. I mean, this is a long conversation with this guy, but it doesn't really lead anywhere.
Well, I think it's just to show like just that this is a small, quiet town, and that there's no law enforcement or anyone who's going to be, there's no watchful eye that. No one's going to suspect Norman, and this guy is like, oh, Norman, no. And so I think it's supposed to show how Norman has gotten away with it for so long.
Just like, nobody believed Ed Gein was capable of doing those terrible things. And actually, in the night that he was arrested, when they found the body of that woman hanging from his barn, like dressed up like a deer, he had actually given some kid a drive into town, and they actually invited him for supper. And he was having supper, and all of a sudden there are all these police cars going around, and they said, oh, I wonder what's going on out there.
Wow.
And they went out, and he was taking the kid home, and the cop car showed up and said, are you Ed Gein? It's like, yeah. Well, I need to talk to you. And that's when they arrested him. Because nobody believed it. It's like, oh, you know who they arrested? Little Ed Gein. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, really?
And it's the same thing here. Oh, little Norman,
Right.
Yeah, poor Norman. He's been through so much.
Yeah.
Here's and then of course Anthony Perkins. I think he might have been one of the first actors that I remember that it became public that he was HIV positive, and then he eventually died of. Wait. Okay, we're gonna have to take that out. I'm sorry.
Huh? Yeah, we can't take stuff out. I mean, this is running with the movie.
Oh, this is the big reveal here. His mom has been dead and buried for the past 10 years.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those twists from things like A-Z Comics, and it turns out he was dead all along.
But even still, with this reveal, you don't suspect that it's Norman dressing up as his mother. You just suspect, okay, maybe she faked her death or something.
Or she's a ghost.
Yeah, so Anthony Perkins died in 92 from an AIDS-related pneumonia, and his urn has the inscription, "Don't fence me in."
No.
It's in an altar by a bench on the terrace of his former home in the Hollywood Hills.
That was an old country song, "Don't Fence Me In." That was my grandmother's favorite song. We played that at her funeral.
It's a Cole Porter song, right? I think.
I think so.
Yep.
And see, so now we have the camera slowly panning up the stairs, and you hear Norman and his mother talking, but you don't see either of them to help make the audience believe, okay, so the mother somehow faked her death. The mother's still alive.
And they only show Anthony Perkins doing both voices one time in the movie, right at the end.
You don't actually see him doing the voice.
Right.
Because it's just in his head.
Yeah, he's just sitting in the prison cell, and the mother's doing the inner monologue about
That's
like,
it, yeah.
Yeah, like I wouldn't even hurt a fly, that thing.
You think I'm fruity, huh?
Yeah.
And again, the camera's going up high, so they can show him coming out with her in his arms, but that way we don't get to see the big reveal until Marion's sister goes in the house.
And it's such a lovely shot. I mean, obviously it serves a purpose, but it's not obvious to the audience at the time.
Yeah.
It's like it's not being obvious and trying to obscure the face of the mother or
Yeah, she doesn't look like a corpse.
Yeah.
But she's not moving either. Like, her voice is agitated, but you don't see her like being agitated in his arms, which is, once you've seen it before, you understand, of course.
I just think it's one of those things where growing up in, far after the movie, it's just kind of in the cultural zeitgeist of, even if you haven't seen Psycho, you know who Norman Bates is, and that Norman Bates is essentially Norma Bates. Kind of like Sixth Sense or any movie that has a twist like that.
Right.
That just kind of it's kind of in the ether that you're aware of it. But I think at the time of being an audience who'd never seen anything like this, it wouldn't be obvious as it is now. again, which is why Hitchcock at the time said, okay, this isn't a movie that you can just walk in at any minute. This is a movie that you have to, once it starts, it's like a theater play. That's it. If you don't make it on time, you have to see the next showing.
That's kind of amazing that people would think they could just kind of walk into a movie whenever. And
well, because movies were a lot more simplistic back then. It just, if you just wanted to, just escape for a few hours, you just walk into the movie, and you literally would just walk in. And movies were so simplistic that you could sit down and after just a few minutes automatically pick up what was going on.
I just want to see the car chase, and then I'm out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes they would have double bills going, and they would just pull marathons and stuff, and people could just come in. And if they missed part of the movie, they would just catch the next showing and just watch the rest.
I think I was reading a Washington Post article from the 80s with Clive. And I think when he actually went to see Psycho with his friend, I think it was a double bill with H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds.
Oh, wow. Huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that quote that we mentioned early in the beginning of the podcast, he did just come in when he saw, the final scene, and then he eventually stayed for the next showing and saw the movie from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. So he did the exact opposite of what Hitchcock wanted audiences to do.
Right. Of course, nowadays people will be terrified to even hear any spoilers before the movie.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me too much, but movies that rely on a big twist, sometimes I don't really get many repeat viewing pleasure from it, say The Usual Suspects or whatever. Once you've seen it the first time, you're like, okay, I got it. Yeah. So
that's why I could never watch The Sixth Sense again after seeing it the first time.
Well, I think it depends. I think it depends on the film, because sometimes, I feel like a more contemporary example would be
Memento.
Us.
Or Us.
Oh yeah, Memento for sure. Us is a film that, even though I saw the twist coming long before it happened, it's a film that the first time you watch it without knowing the twist, it's one film.
I haven't seen that one yet, so
okay. Well, I won't spoil anything, but after you've seen it, you know the twist. Upon second viewing, it's an entirely different film because you're seeing it from a different perspective than what you had originally.
Well, and I think Sixth Sense was that way too, because there was a thing about, every time that he's talking to dead people, there's red in the room somewhere, and Shyamalan, early Shyamalan films were very ingenious in rewarding multiple viewings. I think somebody like Ari Aster is doing that now with films like Hereditary and Midsommar, in that. Even, they do have Midsommar, not so much, but Hereditary has a twist that I think is also rewarded upon multiple viewings.
And thematically, those movies follow similar patterns in terms of having some sort of cult, having some sort of body part, and having
trauma.
Yeah. And sometimes movies that benefit from repeat viewings, like you're saying, Us, or my example was Memento, because Memento is chronologically confused. And I've actually saw a fan cut of the movie where someone tried to make the movie become chronological, which completely takes away the fun of the movie, because the fun of the movie is the character doesn't have any long-term memory, so he forgets things within a few minutes, and the movie is chronologically confused because it's supposed to give you that feeling of what the character goes through.
Yeah. The entire beauty of Memento is the edit, the way it's edited. So to rearrange that, in my opinion, just ruins the entire purpose of the actual film.
Yeah, or The Fountain with Hugh Jackman, which relies on different time period segments all mixed in together.
The Fountain is a more fascinating case because it's far more open to interpretation of what it can mean.
Yeah,
it's not as because Memento is just the color shots are in reverse essentially, and the black and white shots are linear.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about it in that, it's not that hard. Whereas The Fountain is a far more metaphysical thing, where I know Darren Aronofsky said that film is just a whole bunch of puzzle pieces, and it's up to you of how you want to arrange them.
Yeah, he's particularly savvy in making movies that may seem disconnected to normal audiences, but you have to look at them, like you said, in the metaphysical sense. Like I was trying to watch Mother the other day, but I fell asleep watching it.
Yeah, I did not like that film.
Yeah, but Pi is also full of scenes that sometimes you don't know how much time passed in between scenes, or are they dream sequences or not? That, and then of course Fountain, which is based on a graphic novel, also very, very fascinating film. Oh, so this is where they're piecing everything together here.
Yeah. And it's hard. This movie, the twist is so old. I mean, this movie is so old. It's been 50 some years since this movie came out.
Yeah, and so like I said, that's the thing, is that this twist is just in the zeitgeist. It's just whether you've seen it or not, you know the twist.
Yeah. Right, and the shower scene, everybody knows that shower scene, even whether they've seen the movie or not.
Yeah.
It's parodied in The Simpsons and all sorts of things. And I put a video for the show notes. Do you guys remember the Spuds MacKenzie Psycho commercial?
I remember Spuds MacKenzie, but
there is a Psycho commercial where the dog, is in the shower, and the dog's wearing a wig like the mother and all that. I put it in the show notes at the OneNote. You can check that out later, and you can put it on. Yeah.
I know. Jamie Lee Curtis just did an homage to the shower scene in a show called Scream Queens. Maybe like 2 years ago, something like that. I've never actually seen the show, but I saw pictures of it in which she pays homage to Psycho and her mother in that iconic scene.
Yeah. And here, Anthony Perkins is wearing a white shirt, whereas he's been wearing like a black sweater. Now he's got a white shirt. It's like he's putting on the facade of being like, hey, it's just me, little Norman Bates.
Yes, exactly. Whereas when he was talking with the detective, there was definitely an ominous tone to the scene. Yeah. Whereas now he's trying to act like he's this innocent, almost boy again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So she's kind of hiking, instead of taking the regular path, she's hiking up through the brush.
And the house itself is almost a character looking back at her. Like she's staring at the house, and then they cut to the house, and the house is almost like when Kirsty stops in front of the Hellraiser house, and it feels like someone's watching her.
Or the house on Haunted Hill.
Oh man, that reminds me. I got to watch The Haunting of Hill House again because I love that show.
I did.
Yeah, it's a good show.
Sarah never saw it. She's actually scared of watching scary stuff sometimes. It depends. If it's like something that's so scary, so gory that it's fun, she will watch it and riff it.
I don't think Haunting of Hill House is necessarily scary if you think about the ghosts in terms of them being symbolic for mental health instead of actual ghosts.
Sure.
So that's how I interpreted the show, is that the ghosts are more,
especially the dad that talks to his dead wife, and he knows that he's probably not talking to her, but it's just a coping mechanism.
Yeah. The ghosts are just personification for depression.
Oh, we're getting close to the money shot.
Yes. We're in Mother's room, and you can see the indent in the bed of the fact that the body of Mother just lays there
and never moves. Yeah,
it never moves.
It's so creepy.
But I mean, I think, Jose, you also alluded to it earlier that maybe Mother is a ghost or something too. I mean, because
it's like that negative space is like inhabited by the spirit of Mom. Mother.
So like I said, with audiences back in the day, they had no idea what was coming.
Yeah,
she's so not there that she's almost there.
Yeah,
like the indent is almost like she's there.
Yeah, like the Invisible Man or something.
Because, I'm sure some people might look at this and be like, why is this scary that people keep looking at rooms that are empty? But that's just what makes it scary,
One thing I've noticed in this film, and I'm just noticing this, is that there are many, many shots where our characters are standing in front of a mirror or see a mirror, but there's not a single shot that I can recall where Norman looks at himself in the mirror.
There's another one right there. Yeah, like the boyfriend is standing in front of a mirror, and Marion's sister just got scared by looking at herself
by her
in the
own
mirror.
reflection. And I don't know if this is me just trying to, but as far as I can recall, I haven't seen a single shot of Norman standing in front of a mirror.
Maybe he's a vampire.
I just think maybe it's that he can't look at himself the way he is. He probably still does picture himself as a young child.
Right. Yeah. Well, it totally makes sense because he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to remember that he murdered his mother and his stepfather.
Yeah. Essentially.
And there's his room. You can see the bunny, and you can see the bed with a colorful, quilt, just like a kid's room.
Yeah. Essentially, his growth stopped the moment his mother died.
Yeah.
And for example, Ed Gein would go into graves of women to get parts. Also, there's some interviews with a psychologist, Ed Gein psychologist, and one of the things that he, in his insanity, because he was declared innocent due to insanity, but he never left the mental institution after that. But he wanted to be able to bring his mother back to life, and so when that didn't happen, he just thought he could build himself another mother.
Yeah.
And that's why he didn't have any male parts in his house. It was all from women's bodies because they represented the maternal, presence for him. Yeah.
So somebody of this psychosis just doesn't go past the denial stage of grief.
Yeah.
They're just stuck in the denial stage.
Yeah.
And so now she's going to descend into the underworld, the bowels of the house, in which she discovers the true horror that has been at the crux of this film.
Yeah, she's going down into the id.
Yes.
And the tension is palpable. You could cut it with a knife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the way the mother's body swings around, and just kind of just that little shake.
That's a little bit of a cheat, also. I mean, why is that chair spinning around like that?
Right. Uh-huh.
And I love the fact that she hits the light to purposefully make it so that you get this chaotic movement within the frame of the shadow.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's totally an artifice. Like when you scream, hit the lamp, and then here comes Anthony Perkins.
Yeah, it's a good thing he only got knocked out for a few seconds because she would have been murdered also.
Yeah, she would have been dead. But just the way that the light was roving on the mother's corpse almost animated it with life in a sense.
And the way he shakes his head so the wig falls off, and then he struggles and the dress opens up. Yes, we get it. It's Norman.
Yeah, it's very melodramatic, but I'm sure at the time it was just like mind-blowingly shocking.
Yeah.
Right.
And now we get the psychologist the psychiatrist who just essentially gives us exposition for the whole movie.
So my paper was all about his speech. Every line of his speech was explaining, in psychoanalytic terms what he's talking about.
Yeah, and I know that there was a lot of debate of whether to include this scene or not.
Right. I was trying to find. I remembered reading something about Hitchcock being unsure whether or not he should have put this part in the movie.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find the actual reference that I've read before. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because it means I wasn't, I didn't dream it up.
I think it was just that, I don't know if it's producers or studio or what, but the consensus was audiences wouldn't be able to understand the ending unless it was spoon-fed to them.
Right. Just like the whole thing where you create like the thing about the bomb that goes off, and the audience was not happy that, you didn't get the release, the explanation.
Yes.
You didn't come out of the haunt giggling if they had just stopped the movie there and it would be like, I'm Norma Bates, and the movie ends. But it would be like, what was that about? They wouldn't understand.
But it is partially spoon feeding, but it's also, there's stuff that we never would have known. We wouldn't have known that he poisoned his mother and the stepfather. Nobody ever said that.
Yeah, that's true.
In my idea now, I feel like the movie could have ended with him being arrested and them showing him here in custody and having him smile at the camera and hearing the voice of the mother. I would be okay with that. I didn't really need this part where he's talking about, I mean, I feel like you should leave something for the audience to put together themselves. And you could argue that this is giving them the material to understand what was the problem, but I feel like it's too much.
And also the psychiatrist seems really smug.
Yes.
It's like, all right, people, I'm going to explain what was going on.
Yeah.
Back in the day where people would pull up their pants all the way up.
Yeah. To the armpits.
Yeah. Okay, we got that. He stole her corpse. We got it. He has her corpse. We know he stole it.
Yeah.
And he hid the body in the fruit cellar. We know that. That's just my only complaint about this section, is I think they explain too much.
And so being Clive Barker and watching this for the first time, he caught the ending in the beginning, right? And so I have a quote here. This is from the Washington Post article, and he says, quote, "My first thought was Jesus. It was the first 20 seconds of horror I had ever seen. As far as I was concerned, this was just an arbitrary moment. I was terrified witless." Mm-hmm. And he goes on to say he was thinking at the time, are all movies like this?
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yep. But just that unsettling, smiling shot of Norman Bates. I mean, Gus Van Sant did almost a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, and it was one of the most useless movies ever, because it's like, what's the point? I think they used Anne Hesh. Is she the one that plays? Yeah, I think so. And there's also the exact scene for scene. Like, there's even like the Hitchcock cameo scene. There's also a fat guy in a black suit talking to Gus Van Sant.
Oh, jeez.
Which puts himself in the same cameo in the same shot that Hitchcock did his own cameo.
Mm. Yeah, well, Gus Van Sant essentially did that to spite the studio.
I see.
I was listening to an interview with him, I think it's with Mark Maron, and he talks about how after one of his films, I forget what it was, but after one of his films, the studios were essentially bugging him to do a remake of Psycho, and he didn't want to do it, and he kept turning it down, and they kept bugging him, and so finally, just for the hell of it, he says, "Okay, I'll do it, but I'll do it. I want to do it shot for shot," thinking that they would say, "No, we don't want to do that," and they would stop bugging him. But they said, "Okay, sure, do whatever you want." So he just did it to spite the studio and to experiment.
Right.
And it was advertised like it was an experiment, like no one's ever done this before.
Yeah.
Shot for shot remake.
Well, there was a good reason for that, because it's not necessary. Yeah. It's pointless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a shot for shot remake of Hellraiser? It'd be like, man, I'm just gonna watch the original one.
Right. It would feel almost arrogant in a way.
And I'm here. I haven't seen the new Lion King, but I'm hearing a lot about that from the new Lion King as well. Is that it's essentially a shot for shot from the cartoon.
Oh.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Here we get the wonderful dolly pan where we're going close to Norman while he's just having his inner monologue with his mother's voice.
And it's actually fairly subdued when you compare it to the Gus Van Sant, where the guy's actually like looking down and he's kind of having this creepy smile and he's like really overdoing it. And in this one, it's not. It's very subtle, but it's very
subtle.
Yeah.
Also, the camera angle helps to give him that brow, and then you have that cross dissolve where you see his mother's skull or his mother's face on his as it goes into the car being pulled out of.
Yeah. Just for a brief moment, yeah.
Yes.
Almost like just a frame.
Yeah, it's almost subliminal, but it's there.
That's the moment where the mother personality is coming up, just for a second. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
she wouldn't even hurt a fly.
Yeah, and here comes the Marion emerging back into the story.
Yeah.
Just as the movie ends. Yeah.
And that old
Really
Texas guy will come out with his guns going, "Where's my $40,000?"
Bam, bam, bam. Yeah. Man, this was a doozy. Holy moly!
Yeah.
I had fun doing these commentaries that are not Clive Barker related as well. Like when we did the Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah.
That was really fun to make these movies movies that probably we haven't seen in like maybe 10, 20 years and then just go back and revisit. There's
and I think that wasn't a commentary, right? We just talked about it for the A to Z of horror. Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
But we could do. I think that's in D. Is that in D for Devil Rides Out? I can't remember.
I think so. The Devil Rides Out. It's a Hammer movie, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is really cool to see the films that inspired Clive. Mm-hmm. Just knowing that this is the film that he sat in an audience, knowing what to expect, and watching other people get scared and think to himself, "I would love to do this for a living."
Yeah,
that's essentially the genesis of his whole career.
Yeah.
Well, it's what he's definitely
Janet,
what he's most known for.
Yeah.
I got a couple of little notes here from the making of Psycho. One is from Janet Leigh, where she says there was no need for him to be there. Tony Perkins wasn't there. Mother was there. Mr. Hitchcock had several people be Mother. He had his stand-in play Mother at one point. He had a woman play Mother at one point. So apparently they toyed around with the idea of actually having someone play Mother other than Tony Perkins.
Okay.
So so maybe someone with a different stature or something, so people would get misled that Mother might be a real person.
Yeah.
And then Hilton Green, which was the assistant director, says the voice of Mother. They auditioned quite a few people, men and women, for the voice, and some famous names. I can't remember all the names, but they arrived at Virginia Gregg, who ended up as the voice of Mother. Interesting enough, Virginia did the voice of Mother straight through in the sequels of Psycho. And then he goes on to talk about the car in the swamp where Norman puts Janet's body. He says, Mr. Hitchcock wanted Tony to push the car into the swamp, have it start sinking, go to a certain level, and stop. He wanted the audience to gasp and Tony to sit there. Is it going to be exposed? How is he going to get it down? What's going to happen? Then at just the precise moment, it starts going down and then disappears. So we had a backlot set called Falls Lake at Universal. First, we drained the lake, and we put in the same type of hydraulic lift there are in gas stations, where you take your car and you put it up and down, or you change the tires or lube. We sank that into the bottom of the Falls Lake with the ramp of the tires going up to the shore. We had the car rigged up in such a way where it was pulled in on a cable, and it hit the wires, went onto the ramp. Once it was on the ramp, then the ramp took over and started sinking it.
Wow.
And at that precise moment, we could stop it and then bring it down again. It was a one-take shot, and said, we were worried, like, how do you do a take two? It would take quite a while to get the car out, clean it up, do it again. It was a one-shot deal, and we had no problem at all. So that's how they did it. Yeah. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So this movie is rated R. It says on iTunes here. I had no idea.
Probably for nudity and
well,
the nature.
It's yeah. I mean, back then I could see that, but I mean, if they made this movie now, it wouldn't be rated R, would it?
No, it'd be probably PG-13.
I mean, it's just you. I mean, the nudity is just not. They're not showing anything.
Yeah, there's no nudity, and it's just implied graphic violence.
Yeah.
Right.
Now there's not really any, but this is before the PG-13 rating existed.
Yeah.
So I wonder what they would do if Blumhouse would make a remake of Psycho, if they would have Mother show up in the mirrors, or if they would have Anthony Perkins walk in front of a mirror and see himself as a little kid or something like that. That would, they would use something like that for sure. I mean, nowadays we would have more CGI stuff in this, and probably ghosts appearing in the Norman Bates house.
Yeah.
So it must have been like a good 20 plus years between Psycho and Psycho 2.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I think Anthony Perkins for a while tried to go off and forge a career that was different from this, and kind of realized that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, so Psycho 2 was 1983. So this was 1960. Then 1983 was Psycho 2. Psycho 3 was 1986. And then Psycho 4, The Beginning, was 1990.
Mm.
Yeah, as soon as they brought it back, they were like, let's milk this for all it's worth.
Yeah, well, I think Anthony Perkins at that point just kind of gave in.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was Psycho.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for joining us for this commentary track. Thanks to our Kickstarter fans who supported us in doing this. And thanks to Marcus for being with us again on this episode.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, it was fun. Hey, and this podcast having no beginning will have no end. You can find the show notes for this episode and join the discussion over at www.clivebarkercast.com, where we have news, features, reviews, and links to all the ways you can connect with us. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and every other place you can find podcasts. Clive Barker Podcast, or BarkerCast, is an independent editorial, podcast, and news blog that is not affiliated with or under contract by Clive Barker or Seraphim Inc. This is a labor of love by the fans for the fans.
Thanks for listening.
If you're a longtime listener of the Clive Barker Podcast, you might recognize that thanks for listening as coming from Joel Danhauser. So Joel was 3 years old when he recorded that, and he is now, as of today, August 3rd, 2019, he's 8 years old. So happy birthday, Joel. And this episode is coming out one day early on Saturday because of our birthday plans with Joel. So happy birthday.